When my husband Brian told me his mom was really sick and that he had to stay with her, I didn't question it for a second. I believed every word. I hugged him, told him we'd be fine, me and our little girl Annie, and that we'd wait for him no matter how long it took. At first he called often, his voice tired but warm. Then the calls got shorter, the texts colder. Busy. Later. Can't talk. I kept telling myself it was just stress, but deep down, something felt wrong. One Saturday I decided I couldn't sit at home any longer. I drove out to her house 3 hours away, planning to surprise him. And when I got there, when I leaned close to that half-open door and saw what was inside, my world just cracked wide open. That moment, just a glimpse through a doorway, was enough to destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage. On the outside, our place in the Chicago suburbs looked like the perfect family home. 2 stories, neat little yard, flowers I planted every spring. Neighbors used to say our house looked like something out of a magazine. I smiled when they said that, proud in a quiet way, but I had no idea how fragile it all was, how quickly perfect can turn into a lie. My name is Mary Walker. I'm a nurse at the city hospital. It's hard work, long shifts, the smell of disinfectant in my hair, aching feet that barely carry me to the car. But every time I walked in the door, Annie would come running with her drawings. She always drew the 3 of us holding hands, smiling like nothing could ever come between us. I hung every single one on the kitchen wall, a whole gallery of family happiness. Looking at them now, I realized those pictures were more dream than truth. "Mommy, look what I drew at preschool today." Annie barely made it through the doorway before she shoved her paper into my hands. Another little masterpiece, her version of us. Me, her, and Brian, holding hands with these big smiles that stretched across the page. Every picture she made looked the same, the 3 of us together, like nothing could ever break us apart. I would take her drawing, smooth the crayon edges with my fingers, and tell her she was my little artist. Then I'd stick it on the kitchen wall, right next to the dozens of others. That wall had become our gallery of happiness. But if you looked closer, the truth was already missing. Brian hadn't been home in a month. A whole month of silence, where his laugh used to fill the rooms. Brian worked as a manager for a big insurance company downtown. That's where most people thought he spent his time. But when I looked at that wall of Annie's drawings, I couldn't stop thinking about the empty chair at our dinner table, the way the house echoed at night. I met him back in college, when we were just kids trying to figure out who we were. He seemed so steady, so dependable. He won me over with that soft, patient way of his. He wasn't loud or flashy. He was thoughtful, gentle, the kind of man you wanted to trust. He brought me flowers just because, took me out for coffee, listened when I talked like what I said mattered. And after 5 years together, marrying him felt like the safest choice in the world. When Annie was born, I thought we'd built something solid. We were tired, sure. We juggled jobs and late nights with diapers and bills, but we did it together. At least I thought we did. Looking back now, maybe those cracks were always there, hiding under the surface, while I kept taping Annie's bright little drawings to the wall, convincing myself we were unbreakable. People around us used to call us the perfect couple. Neighbors would point and whisper, "The Walkers, they're the real thing." And I believed it, at least most of the time. Every now and then, a little shadow would flicker across my heart, those tiny doubts you shove away before they can grow. But I kept telling myself we were solid, we were happy. Then, about a month ago, Brian came to me with a look on his face I'd never seen before. He said his mom was very sick. She'd lost her husband years back and lived alone in Springfield, about 3 hours from Chicago. Catherine had always been strong, opinionated, sometimes difficult, but I tried to keep peace for Brian's sake. And now he stood in front of me, saying he needed to go stay with her. I remember my first reaction was surprise. She never complained about her health, never acted fragile. Still, helping your mother? That's sacred. I nodded right away, told him I understood. I even offered to pack up Annie and come too. I'm a nurse. I could give injections, keep an eye on her condition, handle things professionally. I thought I was being helpful. But Brian's reaction, it was sharp, almost harsh. He cut me off before I could finish, said no, absolutely not. He claimed she was too weak, that even seeing other people, even me and Annie, would be too stressful for her. He said the doctors ordered complete rest, no visitors, except for the one person caring for her. His words were firm, his tone clipped in a way that made me shrink back. I remember standing there, stunned, with this strange knot in my stomach. Part of me wanted to push back, to say, but we're family, we're not outsiders. Another part of me felt small, dismissed. I tried to swallow it down, telling myself he was just worried about his mom. But something about the way he avoided my eyes that night stayed with me. Something about the way his voice tightened like a rope around my chest. The way Brian said it that night still echoes in me. His voice was harder than usual, almost jittery, like he was wound too tight. He couldn't even look me in the eyes. I remember blurting out, "But Annie and I are family too. We're not outsiders." He softened for a second, gave me that practice smile and said, "Of course you're family, but right now I need to focus on Mom. It's temporary, a couple weeks, maybe a month. Then things will be back to normal." He pulled me into a hug, but it felt stiff, more like an act than real comfort. My body knew it before my brain did. Something was off. A month went by. A whole month of waiting, of trying to convince myself that his story made sense. At first, he came home on the weekends, dragging his feet, barely talking. He said all his energy went into caring for his mom. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But each time, it was like he was further away, not just in miles, but in spirit. And then even those visits stopped. Days passed, then weeks, with nothing but short, flat texts. "Busy, can't leave Mom. Too hard right now. I'll explain later." I would stare at my phone while cooking dinner, waiting for the 3 little dots that never appeared, refreshing the screen like maybe I had missed something. The silence between us grew louder than any fight we'd ever had. One night, I stood at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta, my phone buzzing on the counter. My long message from the day before, asking about his mom's condition, if she needed special care, if maybe I should send over supplies, still had no answer. The pasta boiled over, hissing against the burner, and I felt that same scalding inside my chest. Annie sat on the couch in the living room, her cartoon's laughter filling the air, but her little head kept turning toward the front door. She was waiting too. I could see it in her eyes every time a car slowed outside, every time the floor creaked in the hallway. The worst part wasn't my own emptiness. It was watching my daughter's face fall, night after night, when her daddy didn't come home. "Mom, when is Daddy coming back?" Annie's little voice caught me off guard. It wasn't whiny, not really. It was hurt. I froze with the laundry basket in my arms, then forced a smile onto my face like it was some kind of mask. "As soon as Grandma feels better, sweetheart. Daddy's just busy taking care of her right now. She's older. It's hard for her to be on her own." The words felt heavy in my mouth, like I was chewing on something I couldn't swallow. Annie pushed out her bottom lip in that way she does when she's upset. "But I want to see Daddy, and Grandma too. I even made her a drawing so she can get better faster." She held it out to me, a crayon rainbow over stick figures with big, round smiles. My chest squeezed so tight I thought I'd break right there. I smoothed her blonde hair, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "I know, baby. I know. We'll all be together soon." But the pause that followed was too long. My throat closed up. It hurt to watch her miss him. The empty seat at the table wasn't just mine to notice. It was hers, too. And the truth was, it wasn't only her longing that kept me up at night. I could feel it, too, that quiet, gnawing dread building inside me. Something about Brian's absence didn't add up. Something about the way his voice had gone cold. I told myself not to think it, not to even let the thought form. Because if it wasn't about his mother's illness, then what was it? The next day, during a shift change at the hospital, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I found Linda, my closest friend at work. We've been friends nearly 20 years. She's the kind of woman who never sugarcoats anything, even when it stings. I sat down with her in the break room, still in my scrubs, my coffee untouched, and spilled everything. The story about Brian's mom suddenly being so sick, how he left to stay with her, how strange he'd been ever since, and how he barely spoke to me anymore. Linda leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed the whole time. She didn't interrupt, just watched me with those sharp, steady eyes, and I could tell she was already piecing things together in her head. "You know, Mary, something doesn't add up here." The way Linda said it stopped me cold. I stared at her across the break room table, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence. "What do you mean? You think—" My voice trailed off, almost afraid to let her finish the thought. "I think this whole story about your mother-in-law suddenly being so sick and somehow not being able to handle even the sight of you or Annie sounds, well, suspicious." Linda never sugarcoated. She had this blunt way of slicing through a lie with just a few words. "Look at it, Mary. If it's just about caregiving, why is he keeping you away so firmly? You're not some stranger. You're his wife. You're the mother of his child. And besides, if his mom really needed that much help, there are professionals for that. You could hire a nurse, a caregiver. Why insist on doing it alone? Why get so defensive?" Her words stung because they echoed the questions I'd buried deep inside myself. I felt my stomach knot tighter with every sentence. I remembered how Brian snapped when I offered to come along, how his eyes darted away when I asked about her health. He'd muttered something vague about heart problems, but never gave me details. No diagnosis, no medication names, nothing solid I could hold on to. Just smoke. The truth was, I had been clinging to my little bubble of denial, patching over cracks with excuses. Linda's voice broke through that bubble, sharp and unyielding, and the air rushed out. I could feel those shadows I had pushed away creeping back, stronger this time, darker. For the first time, I couldn't silence the thought, what if this wasn't about his mom at all? Saturday morning came, and I packed Annie into the car before the sun was fully up. The highway stretched out in front of us, long and endless, cutting through open fields and quiet little towns. I drove with my hands gripping the wheel tighter than they should have, my mind spinning through memories I hadn't touched in years. I thought about the first time I met Brian, the way he smiled at me like I was the only person in the room, the way I believed we were building something permanent. I thought about our wedding, the way my dad had hugged me before walking me down the aisle, whispering that I'd chosen a good man. And I thought about the night Annie was born, when Brian cried as he held her tiny body, promising out loud that nothing would ever come before us. The closer we got to Springfield, the harder it was to reconcile those memories with the silence that now lived between us. Annie chatted from the back seat, swinging her feet, telling me about her preschool friends and holding up another drawing she made for Grandma. I smiled back at her through the rearview mirror, but underneath the smile was a prayer, that I was wrong, that when we arrived I'd find a tired but devoted husband and a sick but grateful mother-in-law. I told myself that maybe I'd laugh later about all these doubts, that I'd feel foolish for not trusting him. But my body told a different story, my chest tight, my stomach heavy, every beat of my heart thudding with dread. When we finally turned onto her street, I almost didn't recognize the place. The last time I visited, Catherine's yard had been overgrown, the flower beds empty, the grass patchy and dull. But now the bushes were trimmed, roses bloomed along the fence, and fresh flowers lined the walkway to the front porch. It looked like someone had spent hours, no, weeks, caring for it, and I knew in my bones it hadn't been Brian. He hated yard work. He never so much as planted a seed. Then I saw something that stopped me cold, a small red tricycle leaning against the side of the garage. Annie spotted it too. "Mommy, whose bike is that?" she asked, pressing her nose against the window. I forced my voice to sound casual, saying maybe it belonged to the neighbor kids. Maybe they left it there by accident, but inside me the alarm bells were deafening. Catherine didn't have neighborhood children coming around. She never liked noise or company. That tricycle didn't belong, and yet there it was, bold as day, waiting for someone small to come back and ride it. I parked a block away so Brian wouldn't see us right away. I told Annie we were making it part of the surprise, that we'd sneak up and knock on the door. She laughed and clapped her hands, buying into the game, but my fingers trembled as I tucked her drawing safely into my purse. From the outside, it looked like I was a wife coming to surprise her husband, maybe even rekindle something sweet. But inside, I knew this wasn't a love story. This was a test, and the truth was waiting for me just beyond that white front door. It was still dark on Saturday morning when I buckled Annie into her car seat and pulled out of our driveway. The trip to Springfield would take close to 3 hours if traffic stayed light, and the whole way I kept whispering little prayers under my breath. I prayed I was wrong, that when we arrived I'd see a worn-out but faithful husband and a truly sick mother-in-law who simply needed care. I prayed this whole knot in my stomach was just worry, not truth. The highway stretched like a ribbon through flat fields and scattered woods, the kind of scenery that usually calms me, but that day only fed my thoughts. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached as my mind wandered back through the years. I thought about the first time I met Brian in college, how shy he was, how he tripped over his words but still made me feel like I was the only one in the room. I thought about our wedding day, how my father hugged me tight before walking me down the aisle, telling me I'd chosen a good man. I thought about the night Annie was born, how Brian cried as he held her for the first time, whispering promises I believed would last forever. Those memories felt like warm photographs pressed against cold glass, untouchable, distant, almost unreal. Where had that man gone? When had the air between us changed from laughter and plans into silence and excuses? I wanted to believe it was just stress, just bad timing, but in the pit of my stomach I knew better. I remembered the first time I met his mother, Catherine, a year before our wedding. She'd seemed polite, maybe a little strict, but not unkind. Her cooking filled the kitchen with comforting smells, and her house sparkled with the kind of order that made you sit up straighter. She wasn't easy, but I tried hard to be the daughter-in-law she could respect. And for a while, I thought I succeeded. From the back seat, Annie's little voice broke through my thoughts. "Grandma's pies are the best, right, Mommy? Daddy always said that." She was holding up one of her crayon drawings, smiling proudly, as if her picture alone could heal her grandmother. I forced a smile back at her in the mirror, my throat tightening as I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, the very best." Out loud, I kept it light, but inside I wondered if the woman we were driving toward was the same one I once thought I knew. "Yes, sweetheart, that's true. Grandma's pies really were special." I tried to keep my voice light, but the memory that surfaced carried a sharp edge. When Brian and I first married, Catherine had seemed welcoming enough. She invited us for every holiday, called often, and when Annie was born, she even stayed with us for 2 weeks. At the time, I told myself it was kindness, a mother helping her son's new family. But looking back now, I can see it clearer. Her help often came wrapped in criticism, her advice sliding under my skin in ways that stung, though she disguised it as concern. Still, when Brian told me she had fallen seriously ill, it shook me. Whatever issues we'd had, she was family, and the idea of her fragile and alone felt wrong. The closer we drove toward Springfield, the louder my heart pounded. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel, my eyes scanning every mile of road like I could spot the truth in the trees. It had been almost a year since I last visited her place, and as we pulled into her neighborhood, something felt different. I slowed the car, taking in the quiet street, the houses lined up like old witnesses keeping secrets. Her house used to look tired, the yard overgrown since her husband passed. Catherine would shrug and say she didn't have the energy for gardening, and Brian never cared much about yard work. He was more likely to spend a Saturday on the couch than planting anything in the ground. But what I saw that day nearly made me stop the car in the middle of the road. The garden was immaculate, the hedges trimmed into perfect shapes, roses blooming bright against the fence, the walkway lined with fresh flowers in full color. It looked cared for, loved, almost proudly displayed, as if someone had been pouring attention into it for months. I sat there for a moment, my mouth dry, unable to reconcile this image with the sick, bedridden woman Brian described. From the back seat, Annie leaned forward, pressing her little face to the window, her voice full of wonder. "Mommy, "Do you think Daddy's been taking care of the garden?" Her question hit me harder than she could ever understand. Brian, who barely watered the lawn back home, suddenly planting flowers and pruning roses? That wasn't him. That wasn't his hand in the soil. I forced a smile into the rearview mirror, hoping Annie couldn't see the way my eyes darted nervously back toward the house. "Maybe, sweetheart," I said, my voice thin. But inside me, unease was settling deeper, weaving itself into the quiet certainty that something here was very, very wrong. "Maybe," I told Annie, forcing my voice to sound casual, though inside I knew Brian had never once cared about gardening. He'd always laughed it off, saying he preferred a book or the TV to digging around in the dirt. That's when my eyes caught on something else. Something that didn't belong. A small red tricycle leaned against the shed. Bright, clean, like it had been ridden just that morning. "Mommy, whose bike is that?" Annie asked, her little brow furrowed. My stomach flipped. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe some neighbor kids left it there while they were playing." The words came out smooth, but the lie stuck in my throat. Catherine never entertained children at her place. She valued quiet, order, and Brian had never mentioned kids visiting. So why was there a child's bike parked in her yard? For who? I parked a block away, heart hammering in my chest. If this was really going to be a surprise, I didn't want him spotting our car too soon. I reached into my purse, pulled out a mirror, and fixed my makeup with hands that trembled. I had dressed carefully that morning, blue dress with bare shoulders, Brian's favorite color. I curled my hair into loose waves, trying to look like the woman he once adored. Every detail screamed, "Look at me, I'm still here, I still want us." But the truth was, it wasn't just about looking good. It was about clinging to the hope that maybe, if he saw me like this, he'd remember what we had, he'd soften, he'd come back to me. I smiled at Annie and tried to make it sound like an adventure. "Ready to surprise Daddy?" I said, my voice light, playful. She giggled and nodded, clutching her drawing for Grandma tight in her hands. Inside, though, that chill had already spread through me, icy fingers closing around my heart. Linda's words echoed in my head. Something doesn't add up. The perfect yard, the tricycle, the walls of silence between us. My instincts screamed at me that the surprise we were walking into wasn't the one I had planned. I took Annie's hand, steadied my breath, and together we started down the street toward the house that no longer felt like a safe place. As Annie and I turned the corner, I spotted a woman walking toward us with a small dachshund tugging on its leash. My heart skipped when I recognized her. It was Mrs. Martin, Catherine's longtime neighbor, and the type who always seemed to know everyone's business. I hadn't seen her in a while, but there she was, smiling wide like no time had passed. "Mary, well, look at you," she called out, stopping right in front of us. "You're glowing, honey. And Annie, my goodness, she's grown so much, such a beauty, just like her mama." I forced a warm smile, though my chest was tight. "Hi, Mrs. Martin. It's nice to see you. How have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, can't complain," she said with a wave of her hand. "But I'm so glad to see Catherine bouncing back so quickly. A miracle, really." She beamed at me, her little dog sniffing at Annie's shoes. The words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, she kept going. "I saw her just last week at Walmart, full cart of groceries, moving around like she was 20 years younger. Honestly, it's amazing how much energy she has for her age." For a moment I couldn't speak. My mouth went dry, my heart thudded in my ears. Catherine, healthy enough to shop, lifting bags of food? Brian had told me she barely got out of bed, that she needed constant care. "I thought she was pretty sick," I finally muttered, my voice thin, my face burning hot and then pale. Mrs. Martin tilted her head, squinting at me with curious little eyes. "Sick? Oh no, honey. She looked fine. She even complained about the prices going up again. And those kids with her were just adorable, helping her load up the bags, running around her like little ducks. Sweet as can be." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Catherine sure is lucky to have them around." I stood there frozen. every word tearing a hole in the story Brian had built for me. My hands tightened around Annie's shoulders, as if I needed to hold on to something real. Healthy. Shopping. Children. The lies were unraveling faster than I could catch them, and I felt my world tilt under my feet. Kids? The word slipped out before I could stop it, my voice climbing higher, shaking in a way I couldn't hide. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my chest. Mrs. Martin just smiled and nodded, her tone light, almost cheerful. Yes, those kids Brian brought with him, that little boy especially, full of energy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, cutest thing, calling out "Grandma, Grandma," while helping her with the groceries. You could tell right away, he's family, her grandson. She just lit up with him. Her words landed like blows, each one sharper than the last. My vision blurred, my knees felt weak, and for a moment I thought I might actually faint right there on the sidewalk. Brian, here, with children? Other children? My brain refused to process it. It was like my whole body went numb, as if disbelief could protect me from the truth screaming in front of me. I forced myself to smile, though my lips trembled. I clung to politeness like it might hold me upright. "Thank you, Mrs. Martin. It was so nice talking with you. We should catch up again soon." My voice sounded strange, far away, like someone else's. Without waiting for a reply, I grabbed Annie's hand, her small fingers curling trustingly around mine, and pulled her along. We walked fast, almost running, my heels clicking too loud against the pavement, my breath shallow and ragged. I didn't dare look back at Mrs. Martin or her curious eyes. I didn't want anyone to see the storm on my face. Annie looked up at me, puzzled, but didn't ask questions. She just held tighter to my hand, sensing the fear I couldn't hide. By the time we reached Catherine's walkway, my heart was still slamming, my mind spinning with fragments I couldn't piece together. A healthy mother-in-law, a boy who called her Grandma, my husband's lies tightening around me like a noose. And yet I straightened my dress, brushed Annie's hair back from her face, and whispered to her that we were just going to surprise Daddy. On the outside, I played the role of a wife coming to reunite her family. On the inside, I felt the ground already crumbling beneath my feet. "Mommy, is Grandma really sick?" Annie's voice broke through as she hurried to keep up with me. I swallowed hard, my steps too fast for her little legs, and forced the words out. "It looks like maybe she's not, sweetheart." My mind was racing in jagged circles. Brian lied? Lied so easily, so boldly? Why? And those children Mrs. Martin mentioned, grandchildren, from where? How? I tried to push the thought away, but it clawed back each time, darker and sharper, until it was all I could hear. I stopped a few yards from the house, my chest heaving, my pulse wild in my ears. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and typed a quick message to Linda. "We're here. Something feels very wrong. Neighbor says Catherine's fine, and Brian's here with some kids. I'll call later." Her reply came almost instantly. "I'm with you. Whatever happens, you're not alone." The word steadied me for a moment, a thin thread of comfort in the storm, but the trembling in my knees didn't stop. I stood there, clutching my phone like it could anchor me, whispering to myself, "It'll be fine. It has to be fine." But even as I said it, the lie rang hollow. My breath caught in my throat, and I forced another smile for Annie's sake. She looked up at me, trusting, holding her drawing tight, and I couldn't let her see the panic flickering across my face. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe those children were relatives visiting. Maybe Catherine had exaggerated her illness, and Brian didn't want to worry me. My heart clung to any excuse, no matter how thin, because the alternative was too painful to face. But deep inside, a voice whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. We walked up the stone path toward the front door, each step echoing louder than it should have. The garden around us smelled of roses and fresh-cut grass, but to me it felt like a stage set, perfect and false. Annie squeezed my hand as we reached the porch, her eyes shining with excitement. I forced myself to breathe, straightened my dress, and told her softly, "We're just surprising Daddy." My words came out calm, but inside, every part of me braced for the moment that would change everything. The front door was white, freshly painted, the kind of neat detail Brian would never have cared about. I lifted my hand to knock, but froze when I noticed the door wasn't fully shut. It hung slightly open, a thin slice of air carrying voices out into the garden. My breath caught. I stayed perfectly still, my knuckles suspended in the air. From inside, I heard the unmistakable sound of Brian's voice, steady, confident, even cheerful. It was joined by the light, lilting laugh of a woman I didn't recognize, and then, just as sharp as a knife to the chest, Catherine's voice. Strong, vibrant, full of energy. Not the weak, frail woman Brian had described, not the dying mother who supposedly needed round-the-clock care. She was laughing, bright and lively, healthier than I'd ever heard her. "That's Daddy," Annie whispered, her little body jerking forward as she tried to push through the door. My reflexes took over. I grabbed her shoulder firmly, too firmly, and pulled her back against me. My fingers dug into her soft sweater as my heart hammered against my ribs. "Wait just a minute, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice trembling. My instincts screamed that we weren't ready for what waited on the other side. Annie looked up at me, her eyes puzzled, confused by my fear. "Why aren't we going in, Mommy? Don't we want to surprise them?" Her innocence sliced me open. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile and tried to steady my voice. "Remember, baby, a surprise works best if we watch first. Let's just see what's happening inside." The words felt foreign in my mouth, brittle and dishonest, but it was all I could manage. She leaned forward reluctantly, pressing her small face to the crack in the door. For a few seconds, her expression was blank, then it shifted, confusion first, then hurt, then a heavy sorrow far too big for such a little girl. She turned to me slowly, her eyes wet with tears she didn't try to hide. My chest caved in at the sight of it. She tugged gently at the sleeve of my dress and whispered, barely audible, "Mommy, you have to look." Annie's little whisper shook so badly I could barely understand her, but I leaned down and pressed my eye against the narrow gap in the door. The moment my sight adjusted, the world I thought I knew collapsed in an instant. The living room was bathed in golden sunlight, bright and cheerful, as if mocking the darkness blooming inside me. There was Brian, my Brian, sitting comfortably on the couch, but he wasn't alone. A young woman, maybe 30, maybe a little older, with long blonde hair and sharp, striking features, was curled against him like she belonged there. Her head rested on his shoulder, and his arm was wrapped around her waist in a way that left no doubt. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't duty. It was possession. It was intimacy. At their feet, on the soft rug, a little boy about 5 years old played with a pile of Lego bricks. My breath caught as I stared. Those same light eyes, the same golden hair, the same mischievous spark I remembered in Brian's childhood photos. It was like seeing a ghost of him, small and new, alive in another child's body. A child that wasn't mine. And then, from the kitchen, came the voice that turned everything upside down once more. Catherine's. Clear, strong, vibrant. She appeared carrying a silver tray stacked with glasses of lemonade and a plate of cookies, humming as she moved with a lightness that was nothing like the frail, dying woman Brian had described. She was flushed, healthy, almost glowing, her voice carrying that same commanding tone I'd always known. "Here you go, Brian, Stephanie. Drink it while it's cold," she said warmly, setting the tray down. The boy leapt up with a cheer, wrapping his arms around her legs. "Thanks, Grandma. You brought my favorite cookies." She laughed and stroked his hair, calling him Nathan, her voice filled with pride and affection. My pulse roared in my ears, each beat pounding like a drum of betrayal, and I clutched Annie's hand to steady myself, though my own body felt like it might give out any second. The lie wasn't just Brian's anymore. It was an entire life he'd built behind my back, and in that moment, staring through the crack of that door, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. "Grandma?" My mind twisted around the word. That little boy had called Catherine Grandma, which meant the blonde woman, Stephanie, as Catherine had named her, was his mother. And if that boy was her child, then he was Brian's too. My head spun, refusing to piece the truth together, even as it unfolded right in front of me. The boy tugged on Brian's knee, his small voice high and insistent. "Daddy, play with me. You promised. You said we'd build a big castle." He jutted out his lip in a way so familiar it pierced me like a knife, and Brian, my husband, looked at him with a tenderness I hadn't seen in years. A soft smile, the kind that once belonged to me, the kind that used to light up when Annie ran into his arms. "Of course, son," he said gently, ruffling the boy's blonde hair. "But first, let's help Mommy and Grandma for a bit. Then we'll build the biggest castle in the world. Son." That single word split me open. My knees buckled and I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Every beat of my heart thudded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. My lungs seized, desperate for air. And then Brian stood, leaned down, and kissed her. Not a stolen kiss, not awkward or new. A simple practice kiss on the lips, the kind you give when you've done it 1,000 times before. A gesture of habit, of comfort, of ownership. It wasn't a fling, it wasn't temporary. They looked like a real family, one that had been living this truth long before I ever arrived at that door. Beside me, Annie's voice cracked, trembling like a branch in the wind. "Mommy," she whispered, her eyes brimming, her small hand clutching mine so tight it hurt. She wanted to say something, but the words snagged in her throat. I turned to her, and in that moment, the pain in her little face was worse than any betrayal I could ever endure. Annie's little fists clenched, and before she could let out the cry building in her throat, I pressed my hand gently but firmly over her mouth. "Shh, sweetheart, please, not a sound," I whispered, my lips trembling against her ear. My whole body shook with fear that if she called out to him now, if she said his name, we'd be discovered, and everything would unravel before I had the chance to think. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed time to breathe, to understand what I had just seen, to decide what came next. Her wide eyes filled with confusion, with hurt far too heavy for a child to carry. She pulled back, her face raw with betrayal she couldn't name. I wrapped my arms around her small frame, pulling her a few steps away from the porch. She clung to me, whispering broken questions. Who are those people? Why did Daddy call that boy his son? And that lady? Why did she kiss him? Each word stabbed deeper, echoing the questions already tearing me apart inside. My mind was chaos, a storm of pain and rage so sharp it felt like glass cutting me from the inside out. But even in that storm, one thought stayed clear. I couldn't fall apart in front of Annie. She couldn't see me shattered, not yet. She needed me steady, even if every bone in my body wanted to collapse. I stroked her hair, forcing strength into my voice I didn't feel. "I don't know, baby. I really don't. But I promise you this, I will find out." With trembling fingers, I dug into my purse, pulling out my phone. The camera app glowed against the screen, and I stared at it like it was the only weapon I had left. Words and tears wouldn't matter. I needed proof that no one could deny, not Brian, not Catherine, not even myself when doubt tried to creep back in. Cold, undeniable facts of his betrayal. I crouched down, brushing Annie's cheek with my thumb. "Stay here, sweetheart, just for a minute. Hide behind this bush where no one can see you." I settled her on an old, overturned watering can, tucked in the shade. She nodded reluctantly, still clutching her crayon drawing against her chest like a shield, and I kissed her forehead before straightening. My hands were shaking as I turned back toward the house, ready to see more than I ever wanted, but knowing I had no choice. I moved back toward the door as quietly as I could, my heart thudding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. I crouched low, slipped my phone into the narrow gap, and hit record. My hand shook so badly the image blurred, but the red light was on. I was capturing it. I needed proof, no matter how much it tore me apart to watch. Inside, life went on like some picture-perfect family portrait. Brian sat on the floor, laughing as he helped the boy, his boy, build a Lego tower. Their voices rose in playful bursts, filled with warmth I hadn't heard in months. Stephanie watched from the couch, her eyes soft, full of admiration, reaching over now and then to smooth Brian's hair like she'd done it 100 times before. And Catherine sat back in her chair, looking smug, almost glowing with satisfaction, as if everything in that room was exactly how it was meant to be. I gripped my phone tighter, my breath shallow. They weren't struggling, they weren't suffering. They were thriving, without me, without Annie. They had erased us as cleanly as chalk wiped off a board. In their world, in that bright living room, we didn't exist anymore. Then Catherine's voice cut through, clear and sharp, and my phone caught every word. "Brian, I'm so happy you finally have a real family," she said, her tone dripping with approval. "I told you for years you needed to leave that woman. Mary was never right for you. She was nothing, empty, weak. But Stephanie, she's everything, smart, beautiful, a true mother, a real wife." The words slammed into me, crushing the air from my lungs. My chest burned, and I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping out loud. So, it had always been like this. She had never accepted me, never believed I belonged, and now she was celebrating the fact that I'd been replaced, erased, rewritten out of my own life. Never, never in my wildest fears had I thought Catherine could smile at me to my face, bring casseroles, call me dear, and then whisper behind my back that her son should leave me. But here it was, in her own voice. She had been chipping away at me all these years, telling Brian I was empty, nothing. And then his voice followed, calm, steady, confident. "I know, Mom, I know, but it's not that simple. There's paperwork, property. I'm talking with a lawyer right now about the best way to handle the divorce with Mary so she gets as little as possible. Just don't say anything to her yet. Not until it's settled. I don't want the drama." I clutched the phone tighter, my knuckles white, my body shaking so hard I thought I might drop it. Every word seared itself into me, cutting deeper than the last. Divorce. Taking everything from me, planning it like a business deal, like I was nothing but a name on a contract. Then Stephanie's voice, soft but edged with worry. What if she finds out? What if she comes here and causes a scene? I could see her tilting her head, pressing close to him, her eyes wide with concern. Brian chuckled, a smug little sound that made my stomach turn. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Mary won't suspect a thing. She's so naive, so trusting, like a child. All I have to do is say my mother's sick and she believes it. She's always believed me." His tone wasn't guilty, it was proud, like he'd pulled off some clever trick. A hot wave of rage flooded me, burning through my veins, blurring my vision. Naive, trusting. Was that what he thought of me? A fool to be handled, to be manipulated, to be kept quiet while he built a shiny new life without me. The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal itself. And then, as if my soul wasn't already crushed enough, Stephanie leaned in again, her voice carrying a note of impatience this time. "And when are you going to tell her about Annie?" The name of my daughter, my baby, spoken in that woman's mouth like she had any right to it. My heart stopped cold, my breath caught in my throat. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, the final blow waiting just beyond those words. "She's your daughter, isn't she? We agreed you'd handle that," Stephanie's voice pressed, low but firm. And Brian, my husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, just shrugged like it was nothing. "Of course Mary will get custody. The court will give her that. It's fine. I'll pay whatever child support they assign. No more than that. My paycheck's small on paper anyway. It won't hurt me much. I have a new family now. Nathan is enough. He's my son, my heir." Those words sliced deeper than any betrayal I'd imagined. Spoken with such cold detachment, such dismissive certainty, as if Annie, the little girl he once carried in his arms, sang lullabies to, kissed goodnight, was no longer flesh of his flesh, no longer part of his heart, but reduced to nothing more than a line item in his budget. My stomach churned, my vision blurred, and my hand trembled so violently I could barely stop the recording. Proof. I had more than enough proof. I didn't need another second of it. I pulled back from the door, fighting to steady my breath. my whole body shaking as if I'd stepped into an ice bath. The truth lay there in the palm of my hand. Grainy video, muffled voices, but it was undeniable. He had erased us from his life with the same ease he erased the warmth from his voice, and now it was all on record. I found Annie where I had left her, tucked in the shadows behind the bushes, her tiny body folded in on itself. She was crying quietly, her face buried against her knees, shoulders trembling. My heart broke as I knelt down and wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close until I could feel her sobs against my chest. "Come on, sweetheart, let's go," I whispered, kissing the crown of her head. She lifted her face, eyes red and wet, confusion spilling out of her. "But we're not going to see Daddy?" The innocence in her question nearly leveled me. I brushed away her tears with my thumb, forcing strength into my voice even as it cracked inside me. "Not now, baby. Not this Daddy. But listen to me. It's going to be okay, because Mommy's right here, and I'll always be here. Always." We slipped back to the car as quietly as we could, unnoticed, invisible. My body moved on instinct, guiding Annie across the street, unlocking the doors, settling her into her seat. On the surface, I was still shaking, my heart raw from what I had just seen, but beneath it something colder was taking shape. The storm of grief and betrayal was beginning to harden into something steadier, calculation, clarity. The moment I turned the key, Annie broke down. Her sobs filled the car, sharp and heartbreaking, her little shoulders heaving as she clutched at her seatbelt. I twisted around, took her trembling hand in mine, and leaned close so she could see my face. "Listen to me, sweetheart. We are strong, you're strong, and I'm strong. Whatever happens, I will protect you, always." My voice cracked, but I forced the words through because she needed them more than air. "I know it hurts right now. I know it feels impossible, but we're going to be happy again. I promise you we will." Through hiccups and tears, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Does Daddy not love us anymore?" The sound of it nearly broke me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and whispered back, "Daddy made a wrong, very bad choice. He betrayed us, baby. But it is not your fault. Do you hear me? Not ever. You are the best girl in the whole world, and nothing he does will ever change that." I put the car into gear, my hands gripping the wheel as my chest tightened. Pain swelled through me. Rage, humiliation, grief, but layered beneath it was something new, something fierce. A line had been crossed, and I knew I could never go back to being the trusting, naive woman I had been. That woman was gone. In her place was a mother who would fight with everything she had for her child, for her future. I pulled out my phone at the next stoplight and pressed Linda's number. She answered almost instantly, her voice sharp with worry. Just hearing her say my name steadied me. My world had shattered an hour earlier, but with proof in my hand and Annie's tears still fresh on my skin, I knew what I had to do. The battle hadn't even started yet, but I was ready. My voice surprised me. It was steady, almost flat, as if all the trembling had been burned out of me. The shaking stopped, the tears dried, and what was left was that strange, icy calm that comes after the worst kind of shock, when emotions shut down and clarity moves in. I told Linda everything, every detail of what I had seen and heard, and when I finished, her silence on the other end stretched until finally she let out a sharp breath. "I can't believe this," she said, her voice tight with both anger and pity. "That heartless bastard. And your mother-in-law, what a snake. Mary, honey, how are you even standing right now? What are you going to do?" I stared out the windshield at the hotel lights in the distance, my hands still gripping the wheel. "I don't know exactly yet," I admitted, though in truth, the outline of a plan was already taking shape inside me. "But whatever I do, it'll be the best thing for Annie and me. I won't let them destroy us." "Go back to Chicago right away," Linda insisted, her tone firm, almost commanding. "Stay at my place for as long as you need. Don't you dare go through this alone. Don't lock yourself up with it." Her voice wrapped around me like a safety net, and I let myself breathe a little easier. "Thank you, Linda. You're the best friend I could ever ask for," I whispered, my throat tightening. "But I think tonight I need to stay here, at the hotel. Annie's exhausted, and I need time to think, to get my head straight. There are things I need to do before I drive back tomorrow. By the time I pulled into the small hotel lot, Annie had fallen asleep in the back seat, her cheeks streaked with dried tears, her little hands curled into fists even in her dreams. I carried her upstairs and laid her gently on the wide bed, pulling the blanket over her small shoulders. Her breathing was soft and even, but her face was still troubled, the way children sometimes carry their pain into sleep. Only then, with her safe beside me, did I finally walk into the bathroom and face the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked familiar, but altered, eyes swollen, skin pale, lips pressed tight. She was me, and yet not me. She was someone harder, someone who had seen the truth without mercy and was still standing. For the first time all day, I let the silence settle, and I met her gaze without looking away. The woman in the mirror hardly looked like me. Her eyes were swollen and rimmed with red, her face drawn and pale, but behind the wreckage, something new was burning, a cold, steady flame of resolve. I stared straight into her eyes and whispered to myself, "You're strong. You can do this, for Annie, for yourself." Saying it out loud made it real, a promise I couldn't break. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the list of names until I landed on the one that made my heart beat harder. Elizabeth Robinson, family attorney. I had met her 2 years earlier through a colleague at the hospital who'd gone through a brutal divorce. Elizabeth had fought for her, protected her children, and made sure her ex-husband didn't walk away with everything. My friend had called her tough when she needed to be, but deeply human too. A fighter with a heart. Exactly what I needed now. I drew in a long breath and pressed her number. My hand shook, but my voice didn't. I won't be the victim, I told myself. I'll be the fighter. A calm, professional voice answered, "Robinson Law Offices, how can I help you?" And I said the words I never thought I'd hear myself say, "I need to see Elizabeth as soon as possible. It's urgent. It's about my husband. And it can't wait." The next morning, I pulled myself together for Annie's sake. We had breakfast in the hotel cafe. She picked at her pancakes while I pretended to drink coffee, and then we drove back toward Chicago. On the way, we stopped at Elizabeth's office. Walking into that space felt like crossing a threshold. The receptionist led us to a private room, and then Elizabeth appeared, tall, elegant, maybe just past 50, with eyes that seemed to see straight through me. She carried herself with discipline and authority, but there was something else too, a kind of warmth that softened the edges. She shook my hand firmly, studied me for a moment, and then nodded as if she already understood more than I'd managed to say. And in that instant, standing across from her, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The fight had begun, and I finally had someone in my corner. From the moment Elizabeth looked at me, I felt a sense of trust settle in my chest. I handed her my phone with the video I'd recorded, making sure she knew I'd already saved a copy in the cloud. My voice stumbled here and there as I retold the events of the last 24 hours, but I was calmer than I'd been the night before. She listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes scanning the screen, her expression steady and unreadable. Annie was in the reception area, sipping juice and nibbling on cookies while coloring in a giant picture book one of Elizabeth's assistants had given her. That small kindness, that instinct to shield my daughter from the ugliness of the truth, eased my heart. Annie laughed quietly to herself over the crayons, safe in her little world, while I sat across the desk laying mine bare. When the video ended, Elizabeth set the phone down carefully. "This is more than enough proof," she said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. "Your husband and his mother haven't just acted immorally, they've been reckless, and that works in your favor." She leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk, her tone calm and confident, the way a surgeon might speak before an operation. "Let me walk you through what comes next," she continued. "Step by step, divorce procedure, division of assets, custody of your daughter, and child support. You won't be left without options." Each word she spoke was crisp, precise, professional, but what steadied me most was the certainty in her tone. She knew the path. She had walked it before for others. and now she would walk it with me. As she explained, I felt something I hadn't felt in days: hope. For the first time since pulling up to that house, since pressing my eye to that crack in the door, I wasn't drowning. There was still pain, still anger, but sitting across from Elizabeth, I realized I wasn't powerless. I had a voice. I had proof. And now, I had someone who would help me fight. Elizabeth's words about my rights, about Annie's rights, echoed in my head long after I left her office. For the first time, fear and despair gave way to something else: strength, purpose, the steady rise of determination. That same afternoon, I drove Annie to my mother's house on the edge of Chicago, in the quiet part of town where she kept a small home with a garden out back. Mom met me at the door, her eyes immediately scanning my face with worry. "Mary, honey, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a tired smile, but she didn't buy it. "I'll explain later, Mom," I whispered, kissing her cheek. I knelt down to Annie's level, smoothing her hair. "Sweetheart, stay with Grandma for a while, okay? Mommy will be back soon. You need some rest." She nodded reluctantly, her little hand clutching mine until the very last second. I kissed the top of her head and let her go, my heart heavy but steady. When I stepped back outside, Elizabeth was already waiting in her car, a sleek black sedan parked by the curb. She offered me a reassuring smile as I climbed in. "Did you go to the bank, just like I suggested?" she asked once we pulled away. I nodded, clutching my purse. "Yes, I opened a new account in a separate bank and transferred half of the money from our joint account into it, and I brought all the important documents: our marriage certificate, Annie's birth certificate, the title to the apartment, the car papers, bank statements, everything you said I'd need." She glanced at me with approval. "Good. That was smart. In situations like this, preparation is everything. Now," she lowered her voice, calm and deliberate, "we need to make it look like nothing has changed. Keep him unaware for as long as possible. That will give us time." Her words wrapped around me like armor, and for the first time I felt like I had an edge, a hidden weapon. With trembling hands, I pulled my phone from my bag. My stomach knotted as I scrolled to Brian's name. My finger hovered over the screen for a second too long, my throat tight. Then I pressed call. The line rang, and I braced myself to hear his voice. The voice of the man who had built a life of lies, the man who thought I would never find the strength to fight back. Brian picked up on the third ring. His voice was the same as always, impatient, dismissive, with that practiced edge of superiority. "Mary, what is it? I'm busy right now. Let's talk later. I've got an important meeting." For a second, I almost hung up, almost screamed the truth into the phone, but I forced myself to swallow it down. "Brian, this is important," I said, steadying my voice into something calm, ordinary. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but I knew it was the only weapon I had left. "They just told me I need to go on a work trip. 3 days in St. Louis," I said flatly, staring out the window so he wouldn't hear the shake in my breath. "Annie's with my mom. I dropped her off this morning." There was a pause, and then it came, the faintest sigh of relief. "Oh, I see. That makes sense," he said casually, almost cheerfully. He didn't even ask why so sudden, didn't care enough to wonder. "Well, good luck with the trip. I'll call you later when I'm free." "Sure. Talk soon." I ended the call and held the phone in my lap, staring at it like it was something filthy. Every part of me hated the lie, hated pretending to be the woman he still thought he could fool, but I reminded myself this was strategy, a tactical move, and I was done playing checkers. I was playing chess now. Elizabeth gave a sharp nod from the driver's seat. "Perfect," she said with quiet satisfaction. "Now he won't suspect a thing. This gives us the time we need to prepare everything without interference." Her voice was calm, steady, and in that moment she felt less like a lawyer and more like a general guiding me into battle. 2 days later, everything was ready. A meticulously written divorce petition sat in my hands, outlining custody of Annie, demanding financial support based on Brian's true income, not the fake, watered-down numbers he reported on paper. Every document was in order, every exhibit prepared, every step planned. As I held that stack of papers, I felt a strange surge of power rising in me. This wasn't the broken woman who had stood crying outside her mother-in-law's house. This was someone else. This was a fighter. Elizabeth and I drove straight back to Springfield, right up to the house where my life had been torn apart. When she parked in front, I sat for a long second, my hands gripping my knees, drawing in a deep breath. Inside, everything felt cold, like ice settling into my chest, but there was no room left for hesitation. I had to face him. I had to look into his eyes and show him that the woman he thought he could erase was standing on his doorstep, unbroken. "Are you ready, Mary?" Elizabeth asked quietly, resting her hand on my shoulder. That small gesture anchored me. "Yes," I said, and even I was surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "It's time to end this farce." Together we walked to the porch, her heels clicking with authority, and she rapped on the door 3 times, each knock echoing like a warning. The door swung open, and there he was, Brian. Dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, he looked relaxed, comfortable, like a man who believed he was safe in his lies. But the second his eyes landed on me, the calm cracked. Shock flashed across his face, chased quickly by irritation, then fear. "Mary, what? Why are you here? You're supposed to be on a business trip." His voice was sharp, panicked, his eyes darting past me toward the street as if he expected the whole world to be watching. "I told you not to come here. Mom needs rest." "Hello, Brian." My words came out like ice, calm and cutting. I had never sounded more sure of myself. "The trip was canceled. We need to talk." He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening, his shoulders stiff. "Now's not a good time," he muttered, already trying to close the door halfway, already trying to shut me out the way he'd shut me out of his life. But I pressed my hand against the frame, steady, unflinching. "Oh no, Brian," I said in a voice that startled even me with its control. "Now is exactly the time." "Mom's sick," Brian started, reaching for the same tired excuse he'd used to keep me away. But I cut him off before he could go further. "Or is this really about Stephanie and Nathan?" The words snapped out of me, sharp and cold, and for the first time I saw his face drain of color. His lips parted and closed again, useless, like a fish gasping on dry land. He tried to recover, stammering, "Who? What are you talking about?" But his eyes betrayed him, darting nervously, unable to hold my gaze. "Enough with the theater, Brian," I said flatly, my voice steady and merciless. "I know everything. The lies, the betrayal, every disgusting detail." I could feel my hands shaking, but my words came out with a calm I didn't even know I possessed. I wanted him to see it, that I wasn't the broken, naive woman he thought he had fooled. I was standing here because the truth was mine now, and so was my strength. And then, from the hallway, came the voice I knew too well. "What's all this noise? Brian, who's at the door?" Catherine shuffled into view, dressed in a floral robe with cucumber slices sliding off her face. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. The green mask slipped down to her chin, and for once her sharp tongue froze. "Yes, it's me," I said, my tone polite but laced with ice. "Lovely to see you looking so healthy. Not exactly the picture of someone bedridden, is it? Cucumber masks really must work wonders for the gravely ill." My words dripped with irony, and her mouth twisted in fury. "Brian, get this woman out of here. She doesn't belong in this house." Catherine barked, her voice rising, her face contorting with rage. But for the first time, her anger didn't shake me. I stood straighter, my chin lifted, and I let her see the fire in my eyes. This wasn't her stage anymore. "I don't think that's going to be possible, Catherine," Elizabeth said, stepping forward with calm authority. Her voice carried through the hall like a gavel striking wood. "My name is Elizabeth Robinson. I'm an attorney, and I represent Mary in her case for divorce and division of assets." Her presence filled the doorway, steady and unshakable, and for the first time I saw Brian's mother falter, her mouth snapping shut mid-protest. The commotion drew another figure. Stephanie appeared in the hallway, barefoot, wrapped in a short silk robe, her hair messy from sleep. When her eyes landed on me, panic flickered across her face, and she instinctively pulled Nathan behind her legs, shielding him from view as if I were the intruder here, as if this weren't my husband's house. The little boy peeked out at me with innocent curiosity, and the sight of him, so unaware of the chaos swirling around him, cut me like glass. I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the floor, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I have something to say to everyone here," I announced. The hallway fell silent except for the sound of my own breath. Brian and his mother instinctively moved back, making space as if they knew they no longer held control of the moment. Elizabeth stood tall at my side, her presence a shield. "First," I said, turning to Brian, "here's your copy of the divorce petition." I pulled the papers from my bag and held them out. "The original has already been filed with the court." His face drained of color as he reached for them, his hand trembling. "And here," I continued, sliding another set of papers into his grasp, "is the petition for custody of Annie and for child support, based on your real income, not the lies you've been hiding behind." Brian's lips parted, his face pale as linen. His hand shook as he clutched the documents, eyes darting between me and Elizabeth. "Mary," he stammered, his voice suddenly soft, pleading, "if we just sit down and talk, you'll see. It's not what you think. None of this is what you think." But the lies sounded empty now, hollow in the air between us, and for the first time, he looked like the one cornered. Brian stumbled over his words, rushing, desperate to patch together control he no longer had. "Understand what, Brian?" I cut through his stammering, locking my eyes on his. I didn't blink, didn't look away. "That you betrayed me, that you've been with this woman," I nodded toward Stephanie, frozen in place, "and even had a child with her. That you lied about your mother's illness so you could live a double, maybe even triple life. That you thought I was a fool you could string along forever." Elizabeth's voice rose beside me, calm but sharp as steel. "We have undeniable proof of everything. The video is clear. It shows your little family tableau, and it records your own words about leaving Mary and her daughter behind. That evidence will speak volumes in court." Brian flinched, his face ashen, his hands gripping the papers like they might save him from drowning. I turned back to him one last time, my voice steady though my body trembled with restrained emotion. "Annie and I don't need someone like you in our lives. You're no husband, you're no father, you're nothing." The words came from the deepest part of me, raw but final, and I knew there was no taking them back. Goodbye. I pivoted on my heel and walked out of that house, out of the rot and the lies, out of the world they thought they could trap me in. Elizabeth followed, her gaze sharp and cutting as she cast one last look at the stunned trio in the hallway. The door shut hard behind us, sealing it all off like a tomb. That chapter of my life was dead, buried. 3 months later, Annie twirled through her brand new bedroom, her laughter filling the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Mommy, look at my beautiful room," she squealed, running from wall to wall, touching the fresh pink paint she had chosen herself. Out the window, a small park stretched out, complete with a brand new playground where children's voices carried in the breeze. "A real princess room," I told her with a smile that came easily, naturally, the first true smile in what felt like forever. And in that moment, watching my daughter's joy, I felt something I thought I had lost for good, hope, not just for me, but for us, for the life we were rebuilding together, one unshakable step at a time. The divorce itself went through faster than I ever imagined, smooth, almost painless, at least on paper. That was thanks to Elizabeth's sharp mind and the undeniable proof we carried into court. Brian tried, in the beginning, to argue, to twist things, but the evidence left him cornered. He realized quickly that resistance would only bleed him dry, and the judge's decision came swift and clear. Annie would live with me, child support was ordered, and our property was divided. It wasn't perfect. No ruling ever could erase the damage, but it was enough. The old apartment was sold, and with the money, my own savings, and a small loan, I was able to buy us a modest 2-bedroom place in a better neighborhood. It was smaller, yes, but brighter, cozier, and when Annie ran down the hall, her giggles filling every corner, it felt like a palace. At the hospital, I'd been promoted to head nurse, which came with heavier responsibilities, but also steadier pay. Piece by piece, life was knitting itself back together. One afternoon, as I unpacked the last of our boxes, I heard the soft clink of dishes behind me. Mom appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a little plate of her homemade cookies. "Sit, sweetheart," she said, with that tender firmness only a mother can manage. "Take a break. You've worked yourself to the bone." She had been my rock through all of this, showing up whenever I needed her, cooking for us, staying over when I had long shifts, wrapping Annie and me both in the kind of love that heals what lawyers and judges never could. My younger sister, Laura, had been just as present. Every weekend she came by to scoop Annie up for the movies, the zoo, or puppet theater, her laughter filling the apartment like sunlight. And she dragged me out, too. Shopping trips, cafe lunches, long walks under the orange canopy of fall leaves. She refused to let me wall myself off in bitterness, reminding me I was more than the hurt I carried. "Linda's coming soon with her husband and the kids," I told Mom as I took the warm cup from her hands. The smell of the coffee wrapped around me like comfort, the kind of comfort I once thought I'd never feel again. And in that moment, with boxes unpacked, family close, and Annie's voice singing from her pink-walled bedroom, I realized we weren't just surviving anymore. We were beginning to truly live again. She had promised to bring her famous apple pie, the one that always filled the room with warmth, and to help us celebrate our new beginning. Linda and her family had wrapped Annie and me in care that never wavered, and their presence was a blessing I will never forget. Along with my mother and my sister Laura, they became the anchor that held me steady through the darkest storm of my life. Without them, I might have drowned in grief. With them, I learned to rise. A year later, our apartment was alive with voices, laughter, and music. Annie was turning 8, and for the first time in a long time, her birthday felt like pure joy instead of something shadowed by pain. The living room was crowded with people we loved. My mom, Laura with her husband and little boy, Linda with her husband and her 2 rambunctious sons, and a handful of Annie's school friends and their mothers. The apartment was full, overflowing with life, and I could feel my heart stretching wide enough to hold it all. Balloons in every color floated around the ceiling, ribbons curling down like streamers. The table was covered with plates of food, but it was the cake that stole the show. A tall, frosted masterpiece with 8 shining candles waiting for Annie to make her wish. The air itself seemed to glow, heavy with the kind of magic you only find in moments that are both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. I stood there watching Annie's eyes sparkle as everyone sang to her, and I realized how far we had come. A year earlier, I thought our lives were shattered beyond repair. But here we were, surrounded by love, laughter, and the kind of family that isn't always tied by blood but by choice, by presence, by devotion. My little girl was safe, celebrated, and happy, and for the first time in so long, I didn't just believe in the future. I was excited for it. "Happy birthday, Annie!" everyone shouted at once, the room bursting with joy. My daughter scrunched her nose in that way she always does when she's nervous, took a big breath, and blew out all 8 candles in one go. Cheers and applause filled the air. Her friends clapped and shouted, and she glowed in the center of it all, her eyes sparkling, her cheeks rosy. Watching her, I felt nothing but pride and gratitude. She was happy, and in that moment, that was all that mattered. But then, as the laughter swirled inside, I caught sight of something outside the window. A car pulled into the lot, and out stepped Brian. He stood there for a long time, his shoulders slumped, his suit wrinkled, his face drawn and hollow like a man who had aged a decade in a single year. He didn't approach, didn't knock. He just stood in the shadows, staring up at the light pouring from our windows. His perfect little world had collapsed, the one he'd thrown us away for. I'd later hear the details from mutual acquaintances, how Stephanie discovered his infidelity, how even she had been betrayed by him. Old habits, they said, and he couldn't stop chasing some idea of the perfect woman. She took Nathan and left him, but not before draining his accounts and leaving him broke and bitter. And Catherine, once so smug and strong, eventually did fall ill. Not the convenient story Brian had spun for me, but truly, this time. With no son at her side and no adoring family to prop her up, she ended up alone in a hospital bed, stripped of the control she'd once wielded so easily. I stood at the window for a moment, watching him watch us, then turned back to the glow of the candles, the music, the laughter, and my daughter's shining face. That was my life now. Not the ruin he had left behind, not the pain he had caused, but the new world I had built from the ashes, filled with love, laughter, and people who would never betray us. For the first time, I felt not just healed, but whole. The debts piled up around him, medical bills, missed child support payments that I had to chase through the courts, and the wreckage of his own reckless life. Brian was cornered, financially and morally, and it showed. More than once he tried to reach out, calling, sending messages, talking about reconciliation, about how he had finally realized his mistakes, how Annie was his only and beloved daughter. But I had turned to stone where he was concerned. There was no way back, no second chances. That part of my heart was gone forever. So today, he didn't come to knock, didn't dare to face me. He came only to stand at a distance, parked in the lot, watching from the shadows, watching Annie through the glow of our windows, maybe grasping at some late, hollow sense of fatherhood, or maybe just hoping for pity that would never come. Inside our home, the air was filled with laughter and light. Annie had adapted beautifully to her new school. She had real friends now, girls she trusted, who came over to play and study and dance in her room. She was back to being her bright, curious, joyful self, painting pictures that won prizes at school exhibits, twirling in dance recitals that made my heart swell with pride. And I, with my promotion at the hospital and the quiet confidence of building a life on my own terms, looked at her with nothing but love and gratitude. We had survived, we had rebuilt, and we were happy. From the window, I caught sight of him one last time. Brian stood there, shoulders hunched, his figure smaller than I remembered, a man hollowed out by his own choices. After a long pause, he turned, climbed back into his car, and drove away slowly, his headlights disappearing into the dark. He had lost so much, but it wasn't the apartment, the money, or the comfort that broke him. What he had truly lost, what he could never buy back, never rebuild, was us. Our laughter, our light, our love. And standing there with Annie's voice echoing through the apartment, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. He had his punishment, and I had my freedom. He had lost his family, a real family, the one that had loved him, trusted him, believed in him. He had lost the respect of his daughter, the warmth of her hugs, the light in her eyes when she used to run into his arms. And as his car crawled away from our street, slipping into the night with nothing but ghosts of what used to be, I knew he was leaving with far less than he had ever imagined. Inside our apartment, life went on. Laughter spilled from every corner, Annie's voice rising above it all, surrounded by the people who had stood by us, who had carried us through the storm. I looked around at those faces, my daughter's smile, my mother's steady hands, my sister's warmth, my friend's laughter, and realized this was what real happiness looked like. Not a fragile illusion propped up by lies, but a life built on truth, courage, and love that would not break. Betrayal, I've learned, is always a choice made by the one who betrays, and a choice made by the one who's been betrayed. You can drown in it, let it consume you, or you can climb out of the wreckage and use the pain as a stepping stone towards something stronger. For me, it was the beginning of a life that finally belonged to me and Annie. And as I watched her twirl through the room, her cheeks flushed with joy, I knew the scars were still there. Maybe they always would be, but scars are proof that we've survived, proof that we've healed, even if we never forget. They're reminders of what we've endured and of the strength it took to rise again. So let me ask you, what would you choose in my place? Do you think it's ever possible to truly heal from the wounds caused by those closest to us? Or do we simply learn to live with the scars? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every story matters. Every voice carries wisdom. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because together we can turn pain into resilience and silence into strength. And now I want to hear from you. What do you think about this story? Do you believe people can ever truly heal from betrayal, or do we just learn to live with the scars? Write your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them, and your words really matter. And if my story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss the next story, and together we can keep building this little community of women who aren't afraid to share, to listen, and to stand strong.